Over the years that ECW was around, some very surprising faces made appearances. Some you could totally see fitting had they stayed longer, like Scott Hall or Sid, and others like a knockoff Kamala who used the name Uganda were a bit of a strange sight. The likes of Jimmy Snuka and Don Morocco were around in the promotion's early days, but in 2000, some might say one of the peak years of the Attitude Era, Bob Backlund of all people would turn up for one night. Yes, the squeaky clean Bob Backlund turned up at an ECW show in July 2000. In this video, we'll look at Bob Backlund's wrestling career in 2000, and we'll look at how and why, most importantly why, he came to be at an ECW show. And we'll look at a couple of other places that Bob turned up. We'll get to ECW in a few minutes, including some fan-filmed footage of what didn't air on television. But first, a little bit of context is needed. Having not been seen on a regular basis in WWE since the mid-90s, where he won the WWE title and attempted to run for president, Bob would make a brief return at the start of the next decade. He would wrestle 2 matches in his odd 2000 run, first entering the Royal Rumble match, where he would last 2 minutes. We tend not to think of Bob Backlund when we think of the greatest Royal Rumble entrance, but in 1993, Bob lasted 61 minutes in the match, beating Ric Flair's record the previous year for the longest entry ever. Bob would keep the record for a decade, until being surpassed by Chris Benoit in 2004, and Rey Mysterio 2 years after that. Today, he still has among the longest entries ever all these years later. Bob would also take part in a tag team match on the March 16th, 2000 episode of SmackDown, where he would lose by DQ to Taz and Chris Jericho when Chris Benoit would interfere. Bob would team with the man he was managing at the time, Kurt Angle. In the match, Bob would take one punch from Taz, then leave through the crowd wanting no more. Bob would actually end up being the person responsible for Kurt losing his first 2 championships on the same night at WrestleMania 2000, as Kurt would defend, as he called it, the Eurocontinental title against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit. On the Sunday Night Heat episode prior to WrestleMania, Backlund would reveal that Kurt defending both titles was his idea, and so Kurt would apply Bob's famous move to him, the cross-face chicken wing. On screen, this would be the last we would see of Bob in this run. There seems to have been no bust-up or release made public, so it may well have just been that the storyline with Angle had run its course. Or it may well have been felt that Bob was holding Kurt back on what would become an incredible rookie year. When asked about this in his shoot interview with RF Video in 2008, Kurt Angle's comments were interesting.
Yeah, Bob was he was a live wire, man. He was hard to control. We had a lot of fun, but I didn't want to stick with Bob too long because I thought it might make me a little bit too silly. Right. Bob was really over the top at the time, but I did like being with him. It was an honor and a privilege because he was an amateur wrestler, Division II wrestler, but he was a national champion. He had a lot of success in pro wrestling, so it was kind of nice doing it. But I also knew I couldn't be with him too long.
During his appearance in the Royal Rumble, Jim Ross noted Bob's Congress run on commentary, which we're absolutely getting to another time, by the way. Post his elimination, Bob would exit through the crowd, perhaps attempting to earn a few votes on the way out. On March 16th, Bob's campaign manager noted publicly that they were opening up an office for his operations in East Hartford, New York, about 160 miles away from East Hartford, Connecticut, where he was actually running for Congress. But more importantly, about 130 miles away from Poughkeepsie, New York, where the ECW event we're going to talk about took place. That might well be the most convoluted way I've ever changed the subject on this channel before. On July 7th, 2000, ECW held a TV taping at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in front of around 1,900 fans. On this night, they did a strange deal with Bob Backlund that everyone was swearing wasn't an angle. Backlund was invited to the show, although the word was given that he came on his own. On this night, Kid Cash would face C.W. Anderson, a match mainly notable for what Bob Backlund was doing during it. According to the July 17th, 2000 Wrestling Observer, during the Cash vs Anderson match, he started jawing with fans, doing his gimmick right in the middle of the match, and it took heat away from the match. He was thrown out of the building by security. I don't believe this was taped for TV, but I guess if it is, then it was an angle. Whilst the match itself did air on the July 15th episode of Hardcore TV, the Backlund situation wasn't given any attention, leading to a very awkward moment where you can absolutely tell that something is happening that we can't see, as large portions of the crowd are looking far away from the ring. In the next week's newsletter, Dave Meltzer elaborates a bit on what happened, with a bit of what Paul Heyman has told him. Paul Heyman said that he never invited Backlund to the Poughkeepsie show. He said if Backlund was invited, it wasn't by himself, Steve Carell or Dreamer. Steve Carell, not that one, was the general manager for ECW, who would go on to found the incredibly niche Urban Wrestling Federation in 2011, and would be an investor in Combat Zone Wrestling as well. Paul Heyman then offered his side of what actually happened. He said Backlund arrived and came in the back and wanted to shoot an angle. Heyman said he'd consider it after the tapings were over. Heyman made a final point of noting that the incident was never mentioned on the ECW website or pushed on television, although on the Hardcore TV show during that match, you could tell when it's all happening. He said Backlund wanted to apologise about it afterwards. Those close to Backlund said that security apologised to Backlund afterwards. While the incident may not have aired on television, fan-filmed footage of Backlund in the crowd while the match is taking place exists. In this short clip that I found on YouTube channel Lou Gregory, you can clearly see the match going on. Then the camera pans to show Backlund getting into an altercation with a fan, who Heyman told the Observer was a plant brought by Backlund. At the end of the footage, we can see that one recognisable bloke from Atlas Security talking to Bob before he was led out the building. When I was looking for more information on Bob Backlund's appearance, I found that Tommy Dreamer talked about it on a 2014 episode of Steve Austin's podcast. Tommy refers to the incident as, quote, a shoot run-in, and tells us this when Austin asked for clarification.
And we had Atlas Security throw him out of the building.
Now, what do you mean a shoot run-in?
He is crazy and did a shoot run-in,
Okay.
1990, whatever. He's talking to Paul about doing a promo. And Paul's like, Bob, I'd love to have you, but it's 15 minutes before the show. And he's like, if you would have called me before, and he's like, well, no, I don't want to do anything wrestling. I want to talk about politics. I'm running for office in Connecticut. And Paul's like, well, Bob, this is New York, and, I really can't put you on the show. And Bob's like, well, I really want to. He's like, Bob, I'll try to figure something out, but I can't. No problem, Bob Backlund leaves. Now I'm watching the show, and we're sitting there, and we have a little table. And as I'm watching from the crowd, from the top of the building, I see Bob Backlund holding a sign that says, vote for Bob Backlund. Now I'm writing the shows with Paulie, and I know what's going on, and I say, Paul, why do you have Bob Backlund doing a run-in? And he goes, I don't. And I said, Bob Backlund's coming to the ring. And he says, no, he's not. And I, like the Wizard of Oz, I pull over the curtain and I point to Paul over the headset to Atlas. Get fucking Bob Backlund out of the building! So Atlas Security swarms on Bob, and then they get Bob Backlund out of the show.
I kept digging a bit and managed to find Bob talking about the incident himself in an interview he did with Camel Clutch blog in 2015. I'll let you hear Bob's explanation in his own words.
I had a couple people that were sitting in the front row, and I was in the back of the dressing room, and I asked the referee when would be a good time for me to go down and get those guys, because we were going to leave. Mm-hmm. I went up to the top of the building. It was kind of like in a theater where there was built up, and I started walking down the aisle to find those two people that I was going to pick up, and the people started. They got into it. They got into the character of Mr. Backlund, and they went wild.
Wow.
And then they came up, and I just walked out. They didn't do anything, but
okay.
I thought, and what they had is they had after that match, the end of it, they were going to do something after that match. They weren't going to leave. They had a finish that was going to be extended after the end of the match, so they were still taken. And then I was told that would have been a good time to go down and get them and get out of there. And it wasn't, because they didn't tell me about it's going to be a pin, but then there's going to be some after-match stuff going on in the ring that they're going to film.
So Backlund claims that he was told that then would be a good time to collect his friends who were on the front row, only to discover that a post-match angle was taking place. In the fan footage, we can see the match taking place, and by the end of it, we also see the run-in is happening. So his timing is accurate, but his motive remains a bit unclear. A fan account found on a forum from a couple of days after the event also mentions that Bob was raising money for his political campaign, noting that he was actually running in neighbouring Connecticut, which I suspect, but can't prove, might have been the reason. Following his Congress run, which concluded in November 2000, Bob kept his toe in wrestling, or should that be his wing? In 2001, he completed a short tour with New Japan Pro Wrestling, where he would wrestle 4 matches, all involving Tatsumi Fujinami. The two would have a 7-minute exhibition match before teaming together on the next 2 events, and would be opponents again on the last. While on the surface these matches might seem unusual, Backlund and Fujinami had first met in the ring in 1978, and they would meet for the final time in Bob's last matches in Tokyo and Osaka 40 years later, when Bob was at the age of 68 years old. In post-match comments he made on August 10th, where he and Tatsumi had teamed up against Terry and Dory Funk Jr., Bob noted that the Funks had recommended that he go to Japan in the early 70s, and so he seemed to have personal connections with most of the wrestlers he interacted with on this tour, including Steve Kern, perhaps better known as Skinner, who he was in a tag team with in the mid-70s. Making this video made me wonder though, what if Paul had allowed Bob Backlund to shoot an angle that night? What if the financial problems ECW was struggling with, and an ever-declining relationship with TNN, had driven him over the edge enough to bring Bob back for a program the way he had with Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk? Unfortunately, Taz had left by that point, so we couldn't see them clash in an ECW ring. But what about Bob Backlund versus the likes of Steve Corino, who at this time was becoming a more serious heel character, having just feuded with Dusty? Or even Paul's next project, his last world champion, Rhino. One of Paul's biggest stars at the time was Raven, but he was on his way out of ECW again, this time heading for WWE. Can you imagine if they had interacted? The clean-cut Bob Backlund versus the counterculture of Raven. Do you think Bob even knows what a Pearl Jam is? All of these questions will remain unknown, probably where they should be. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.